Good evening and welcome to Lessons of Vietnam. My name is Paul White and I'm your host today in the absence of Bill Dixon, who had back surgery earlier today. I understand the operation was successful, but Bill has a 6 week recovery period. We're looking forward to him getting back on his feet. And Bill, just know that our thoughts and prayers are with you at this time. So I'd like to thank Bill for all of his work, as well as Bob Matthews, in hosting this program over the period of time that it has been aired. And big thank you to Amnon Nissan, who makes this program possible with his expertise, his equipment, and the facilities that he provides to us for this program. Now, tonight, we are having Dave Samuels, gunship helicopter pilot, as our guest tonight. Dave and I have known each other for 4.5 or 5 years. I've come to have great respect for him and what he does, and would like to talk with him about his experiences in Vietnam. And as a radio operator with the 1st Cav Division myself, I was around helicopters a considerable amount of time. And we do have some comparisons and contrasts to our time in service in Vietnam. I think we can get into some of that, and hopefully you'll find this program tonight to be interesting, informative, and perhaps entertaining at times with a little levity. So having said all that, would like to welcome my guest here, Dave Samuels. It's an honor to have you, Dave, and could you start by telling us a little bit about how you came to join the Army? I was drafted, so I didn't have a whole lot of choice there, but as I understand your story, you did have some really patriotic motivations behind what you did.
I did, Paul, and thank you for inviting me on the show. And again, thank you, Amnon and Amnon Communications, for doing this for us. As you must know, that Vietnam and lessons of Vietnam are very close to our hearts, being Vietnam veterans. A lot of people out there and listening might not have been born or around during that era, but we are most of the time happy to share our experiences. I was a pretty normal teenager living up in the Northeast during the 60s. And as we know, anybody that lived during that era, it was a tough time to grow up. All parents, grandparents, great grandparents talk about how difficult their era was and what it was like growing up in their time. The 60s were tough. Race relations were exploding, segregation, integration, free love, assassinations, President Kennedy, his brother, the Reverend, and everything else, and the Vietnam War, and the draft. And if you look at the music that was written during the Vietnam era, there was more music written during that era than any other war era of our time. So anyway, I was a teenager, and every Thursday night, when my sophomore, junior, senior year, they would come on the 6 o'clock news and talk about the casualties that were going on in Vietnam. Vietnam was the first living room war, where something that happened during the day was talked about and broadcast that night. So it brought the war really into the living rooms of most Americans. And for some reason, it was weighing heavy on me. I was thinking a lot about it, and I knew the draft existed. I knew that high school graduates got college deferments. But anyway, when I was a junior and a senior, it really, really weighed heavy on me. It was on the front page of every paper, on 6 o'clock news every night. And it kind of resembles, it's hard for people to relate to what I'm talking about. kind of relates to after 9/11, how many young American males wanted to join the service because they were outraged at what happened in 9/11 by the terrorists, and they wanted to, number one, serve their country and be a part of the payback. Uh, that was a little bit of my motivation. I wanted to protect Americans. I really believed in the domino theory and what we were being told about the communists and how they were going to take over the world a little bit at a time. And Vietnam was a good place to stop them. And I really had a dying ambition to be a pilot, to be an aviator. And I found out that none of the services were accepting draftees into their flight program. You had to sign up, so I joined. And that's how I started in the service.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Now, the helicopter was used in Korea, but it really came to the forefront in Vietnam. Could you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the helicopter being used in warfare?
Sure. As I say, the helicopter was born really in the 40s, and was used very limitedly in Korea for some observation and some medevac in a very small, slow-moving aircraft that had with not much armament or protection. And we all know that need is the mother of invention, going back to the caveman when they wanted hot food and fire and everything that went along. During civilization, when a need arose, an invention came to satisfy that need. During World War I, World War II, Korea, the armies, the tanks, the airplane, the aircraft carriers, the Navy was accomplishing everything by using the oceans, the rivers, and the roads and the airports. When we got into Vietnam, the jungles were the prevalent part of the country. The airports were very, very limited. The roads were very, very limited. And the navigable waterways were very limited. So the United States needed, or any opposing force needed, a way to get to the enemy, get their troops and their armament and things to the enemy, and the only transportation known to man at that time in the early 60s was the helicopter. So the Army and the Marines and everybody else went to the civilian manufacturers, Lockheed and Bell and Textron, and they said, we need to advance the technology on helicopters. We have a big need for it. So it evolved quite a bit faster than it would have had it not been for Vietnam and had it not been for that need. So we went from basic advanced helicopters in the early 60s to very, very advanced helicopters to the late 60s. And then from then on, it's just it's a piece of equipment that basically civilians and military can't do without. I was in Vietnam in 1968 and 1969, and at the time, the helicopter gunship was the most sophisticated, advanced, close combat weapon that the services had. And when they talk about don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes, we quite often did see the whites of their eyes because we were that close to the enemy. And like I said, we had the most sophisticated, advanced weaponry that was available during that time. And today, what they have available in the helicopter mode made what we had back in the 60s a total dinosaur. There is no comparison to what we thought was the state of the art compared to the Apache and some of the things that are available today.
You know, I remember the first firefight that I was in, and we called in a helicopter for assistance, and it was quite a show. It was almost as if we set aside our weapons just to watch the chopper do its job. Now, I had also heard that helicopter could do the work of an entire platoon. Would you comment on that, or have you heard such a comparison as that?
I haven't heard those particular words. I'm not sure what they're referring to, but the helicopter, the Slick, the troop carrier in Vietnam, was capable. Was of carrying a crew of 4, aircraft commander, a pilot, crew chief, and gunner that manned 60 caliber machine guns on the back, and they could carry 8 fully armed American soldiers or 10 fully armed ARVN soldiers, South Vietnamese soldiers, basically because the weight. The ARVNs were lighter and smaller than the Americans, and the helicopter is crucial on weight, um, the ability to pick up and land with the capacity. So, uh, a typical mission was 10 slicks or 10 group carriers carrying 80 Americans or 100 Vietnamese into a landing zone, into a combat situation at one time. They could get them on the ground, within minutes. So they were a workhorse, and you cannot see a picture or movie or photograph of Vietnam or hear a story about Vietnam without some way or another the helicopter coming into that story or that picture. It was the workhorse. And by the way, from 1963 to 73, we lost 5,000 helicopters. Lost.
Well, I recall as one of the troopers that you were talking about that one of the scary things for us that you didn't experience because you were up front was when you were piloting a helicopter and it would bank steeply to the left or right, and we were on the lower side of the chopper. We were not held in by any kind of seat belts or hooks or anything. It was just a pretty scary feeling going through our minds and so forth that we were just going to slide off of the floorboard and fall a couple of thousand feet. Do you know of any instances where anybody was lost from a helicopter in such a manner?
I do know that. We try not to talk about those stories too emphatically, but there was accidents, and I have seen. I did not spend a lot of time flying slicks, and I'll go into that story. I wanted to be a gunship pilot right away, but I did see a lot of pictures of the guys sitting on the edge with their legs hanging out and holding their weapon and not being tied on. And yes, the aircraft would bank right or left. The pilots would try to do these gradual, but depending on the circumstance, if he was receiving fire or trying to avoid weather, the safety of the aircraft was more important than the guy sitting on the edge. So yeah, there were occasions of people falling out and a couple occasions of POWs falling out. But other than that,
Was that on purpose?
it was accidental.
Okay, I'm sure it was.
But it was it was quite a workhorse.
Uh-huh.
The aircraft was amazing what it could do and what how it brought the armed forces closest to the enemy.
Uh-huh. Well, not all pilots tried to avoid the rain when they were piloting their choppers. One of the most uncomfortable feelings that I had in a chopper was when it was raining. Our legs were dangling outside, and the raindrops were being supercharged by the rotors, and it felt like we were being shot with BBs until we landed or the rain stopped. And so those were the two most uncomfortable feelings I had in a helicopter. Other than a couple of times we were being shot at, that was not a real good feeling. But at any rate, you mentioned that you wanted to be a gunship pilot from the get-go, and you have written a book called I Was a Pilot for the Mob, and the first chapter of that is intense, and it is action-filled. And I know also that you were awarded the Silver Star, and somehow or another this all ties in together, I think. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about not a little bit, tell us everything about the Silver Star and the action that you were awarded the Silver Star for.
Okay. I'll go back a little further when a pilot that graduates flight school, and we all graduated flight school after 1 year. Some of us went right to Vietnam. Some of us went to units forming up to go to Vietnam. You're supposed to get 30 days leave from a stateside to a combat unit, but the demand in 1968, right around the Tet Offensive, was pretty intense. The demand for pilots, the demand for more troops. So I was initially given 24 days leave and then sent a telegram to report in 17 days. Anyway, got to Vietnam, and the standard procedure is once you get to Vietnam, you have to fly 300 hours in country as a co-pilot before you can become an aircraft commander. Now, we had just finished a year of flight school, and we averaged about 250 flying hours in flight school to get our wings and to get us ready to go to Vietnam. And then they wanted us to fly another 300 hours as a co-pilot before we could get our own aircraft commander. So that annoyed me a little bit. I'm thinking, why was I the best in my class, and why do I have to be a co-pilot for 300 hours? And they told me to keep my mouth shut and keep my eyes open, and maybe I'll live for 300 hours and get the opportunity. So once I was given the opportunity, I went into the gunships, and they were in an assault helicopter company. The gunship platoon, there was 3 platoons, 2 slick platoons, and 1 gunship platoon, was they thought themselves a little bit elite in the company. They actually got to pick and choose which pilots they wanted to be in their gunship platoon.
Mm-hmm.
So once I got my 300 hours and I knew I wanted to be a gunship pilot, I started hanging out with the gunship pilots existing and polishing their shoes, getting their, making popcorn for them, emptying their latrine, doing everything I could to get on the good side of the
Sucking up to him, in other words.
the gunship pilots, sucking up to them. And sure enough, they did accept me into their platoon, and I became a gunship pilot again as a co-pilot in the beginning, and then as a aircraft commander. Once you become an aircraft commander, you get your own helicopter assigned to you with your own crew that you fly and take care of every day. And then gunships always fly in either a pair of 2 or 3, and that's called a fire team. And after you become a aircraft commander, then the next step would to be a fire team leader, and then platoon leader in charge of the whole thing. So after being 9 or 10 months in country, I felt I was the most senior person in my gunship platoon.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I had the rank, but everybody senior to me had either been shot, killed, or sent home under normal rotation. So I was acting platoon leader and fire team leader until they brought in someone with a higher rank that could take over that position. Every night in Vietnam, there was gunships on fire team alert, which meant that if there was action someplace, a fire team, a gunship team, would go and assist in that firefight. The Viet Cong, as you know, and in the Delta, in the southern part of Vietnam where we were, we fought mostly Viet Cong. And they were originally they were South Vietnamese that were pro-communist and
Right.
fighting the communists.
Mm-hmm.
Then we found out later that most of them were down from North Vietnam anyway, and just
Right.
wearing black pajamas instead of uniforms. They loved to attack at night in bad weather. They knew that if we could not control the skies, they had a better time or better opportunity to control the ground. So they would love to attack when they thought that we could not get air superiority over them. So sure enough, a compound near the Cambodian border was being attacked, this time outside of Tay Ninh, where you were.
Right.
And we got a call from this young captain pleading with us that his compound was under attack by an overwhelming force. And the weather was bad. The ceiling was about 200 to 300 feet off the ground. It was raining, dark. When it's dark in Vietnam, as you know, it's dark.
Yep.
From the air. There was very little electricity out in that part of the region. So if you couldn't see candles on the ground or torches, you couldn't tell which was the ground and which was the air. So it was very tough flying alone at night, let alone with bad weather and rain. So we already checked on the Air Force. The Air Force couldn't do anything because they couldn't see the target. They can't see it. They can't hit it. There was no artillery close enough to help them with that situation, and the closest ground forces were hours away. So the only hope for reprieve for them was a gunship team, helicopters. And I told the young lieutenant that there's no way we can go now. If we could wait a couple hours, hold off for a couple of hours until the weather broke, we'll be right there. And his voice broke and told me, he says, we won't be here in a couple hours. He said, we will not be here by sunup. That's how bad his situation was. And that's all I had to hear. I mean, when an American was in trouble, that was our job. And I knew this was going to be a very suicidal mission. And there was 8 other people, or 7 other people besides me involved in it. So as I was walking out to the flight line, trying to prepare myself for what I was going to tell my crew, I started telling them that what the situation was, and we were the only way out to help them. As I was talking to them, they were just strapping on their gear and getting the aircraft ready. There was no question in their mind that we were going to go regardless of what happened. So we took off, and like I said, the weather was really bad. The ceiling was really low. We like to fly at 1,000 feet, and the best we could do was 400 feet. And I had the crew chief and gunner each looking outside the aircraft, looking down, trying to follow the road from where we were to where we were trying to go. Instead of going 120 knots, we were going 50 knots. So it took us a lot longer to get there. But when we did get there, I called the captain, said we were in the vicinity, and I said, where should we start our gun runs? And he said, that's pretty much a moot point. If you can see my compound, we are surrounded. And the closer I got, the flares were up, the bombs were exploding, the mortars were exploding. The place was pretty lit up, and there was no question where the enemy was. So the gunship is pretty well armed. We had my wingman and I each had minigun ships. We each had one minigun mounted on each side. The minigun is capable of shooting 5,000 rounds per minute. We each carried 20 rockets. The rockets were 2.75 with a 10-meter bursting radius, and each of the crew chief and the gunner had handheld M60s shooting 7.62 rounds also. So we were pretty heavily armed. So we got on site, and luckily we were able to climb up to 1,000 feet instead of 1,500, which was the optimum height to start a gun run. And we started firing around the compound, and he was surrounded. And there's usually 2 to 3 bands of concertina wire, barbed wire around the compound, and they had penetrated the outside and were getting ready to come into the inside. Inside the compound, there was about 12 Americans and about 30 Vietnamese in this listening post compound. We started firing our machine guns and our rockets, and within 15, 20 minutes, we had fired every single round we had, including our sidearms, our pistols, and our M16s that we carried for escape and evasion. We were firing out the window with our pistols and our guns. And I told the captain said that we're out of ammo, low on fuel, nothing else we can do here. We have to go rearm and refuel. He said, well, it looks like you slowed them down a little bit, but they're not done, so hurry back. So the nearest rearming place, and again, the clouds were raising a little bit. The rain had stopped a little bit, so the weather conditions were getting a little bit better in our favor. We flew back, we flew 20 minutes to get to the rearming place, and it was pitch black dark, and none of the normal rearmers, refuelers were there. And I was afraid to totally shut down the helicopters because, God forbid, we had any kind of a mechanical failure or a battery failure. I just didn't want to do that. So we had the co-pilot stay in the aircraft to keep the engine running, pulled all the essential circuit breakers so we wouldn't have any accidents, and refueled it hot and rearmed it hot. And we're back in the fight in about an hour. And they had regrouped and were starting their attack again. And we basically did the same thing. We got there at about, I guess our first gun run must have been around 11 p.m. at night. And now it was about 1:30 in the morning. And we did the same thing. Within 20 minutes, we had fired every round we had. And we went back and refueled and rearmed. This time we had to take a little breath because they had formed a little surprise for us. They had one little section. They had some RPGs and a bunch of so-called snipers in one group that were going to take us on from the ground. And once I realized that, we had to eliminate that threat so we could get around to the other ones, and we were fortunate enough to do that. We took some hits. We landed the second time, again, keeping the engines running. I had 4 or 5 hits in my aircraft, and my wingman had about the same thing, but not in any crucial parts. They were in, one was in the blade, one was in the cowling, one was in the skid. Nothing in the engine, nothing in the transmission, nothing in the radios. We were very fortunate that we did that. So we went back there the third time. Now it's, I guess it was probably 4 o'clock in the morning. And basically, they had thinned out. And once the sun started to come up, they started to, what was left of them, and there was quite a few bodies all over the area. They started to retreat into Cambodia. Across the border, they knew exactly where the border was, and they knew that we were not supposed to go into Cambodia after them.
Right.
But surprise, surprise, we couldn't find our map, and we didn't know exactly where the border was. So we did follow them, what was left of them. And we anticipated there was close to 300 or 400 of them on their attack last night. And the Americans lost 3 dead and 4 wounded, and the Arvins lost about 8 dead and 10 wounded. But the compound was saved. The night was saved, and we did a lot of damage to the enemy that night. And all we did, the Americans, my crew chiefs and my wingman, all we did was, got the call and went out to help Americans that were in need, and that was our job. That's all we did. The captain wanted to know my name and my unit and everything like that, and within 24 hours, he called his superiors and wanted me to be awarded the Silver Star. So that's how it happened.
Wow, that's quite a story. You know, and my observation of helicopter pilots over there, and by the way, I never saw a helicopter I didn't like. But my observation is that helicopter pilots had to have a large dose of courage and a bit of a dose of crazy to do some of the things that you did, but you did it for the right reasons. And we all appreciate your service, Dave.
Let's tell everybody that if you have the ability, and you should call in and talk with Dave and Paul and ask questions, you can call 919-518-9773. Or if you're on Skype somewhere else in the world, you can connect to us. Computers 2K voice, and this is just audio. You're not going to be on video. And those of you who are watching the show, I don't see you in the chat. So to the right or below the video, just enter your name or a handle or whatever and come in the chat, and you can also communicate that way.
Say the number again.
919-518-9773. Do it.
Okay.
You're right. We were basically young and invincible.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was 21 years old this night that I just described, and I used to get up every morning and put my bulletproof vest on, and go out and do a job that we were destined to do. Because
Right.
if we weren't young and invincible
Mm-hmm.
and fearless, not so much the fearless part, but we couldn't have done it.
Right.
We couldn't have done it. Once you get older, you establish bad habits,
Uh-huh.
like wanting to relax, wanting to read, wanting to go out for dinner. That doesn't work in a combat situation.
Right. Well, let's move to a little bit lighter subject. One of the things that I experienced quite a bit of were encounters with wildlife in Vietnam. And I know that you had a couple of encounters that I'd like for you to share with the audience here. A lot of times these stories are pretty humorous.
Okay. One of the things that a combat pilot hates the most is paperwork, and having to after every mission, regardless of what time we would get in or how much combat we had, we would have to file an after-action report. How many rounds you fired, how many KIAs, WIAs, how many hours you flew, how much fuel you used. I don't know what they do with this information, but we used to have to compile it. So one day I casually noticed I casually wrote down on my after-action report that I had seen a small herd of elephants in the Delta, in the part of South Vietnam. And it was very unusual to me because they didn't belong there, and I had never seen them before. So I casually mentioned it. 2 days later, I get called in to my commander. He says, "Tell me about these elephants. Where were they? What were they doing?" And I said, "Well, they were just walking around. They were brown, not gray, and there were some large ones, some small ones." And the commander says, "Well, I got word down from headquarters that you need to go back and find them." And I says, "Why?" He says, "Well, they don't belong here. They're being used by the enemy to transport ammunition and stuff, and we need to eliminate them." I said, "Eliminate the elephants?" He said, "Yep, that's what you got to do." I said, "Well, the chances are they're not where they were when I left them, if I can remember." He said, "Well, you got to go look." So I took a fire team, 2 helicopters, all day. I mean, this is how important this was. We're going out and looking at the aircraft. So I asked him, I said, "If I do find them," I said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, we need you to eliminate them." I said, "You want me to go elephant hunting?" He said, "That is correct." I said, "Well, what would you like me to use? I don't actually have an elephant gun." He said, "No, you have a gunship." And I said, "You want me to go hunt elephants with my gunship?" He says, "Yes, that's what we want you to do." So, okay, so we took a fire team and we went down to the Delta, and we actually looked. We didn't look as hard as we might have because I wasn't sure what I was going to do if I actually found them. And luckily, I didn't have to make that decision because we did not find them. So I went back and I said, "No, can't find them. They weren't there." So he sent me back the next morning. He says, "Well, we need you to find them." I went back there again the next day, and about halfway through the day, I got called out and said there was a combat that needed our assistance someplace else, so leave that mission and go to another mission. So we never found the elephants.
Well, funny things do happen even
They do.
in war.
They
And
do.
just to share one of the stories that I have, I became friends with the medic in our group, in our platoon, and we would usually set up our hooches in the jungle close to each other, and he had a habit with each meal of fixing hot chocolate. And when he finished with his hot chocolate and his meal, he would stick his machete in the ground, and then he would rinse out his canteen cup and hang it upside down on the handle of the machete. That way it could dry and drain and dry out. And he did that one night, and the next morning we got up, and he was going to fix his hot chocolate for breakfast. And when he took the canteen cup off of the handle, there were 3 little monkey turds that were stuck in the bottom of the canteen cup. And he called me over there to show me. So we could just imagine sometime during the night, a monkey came down out of the trees, took the canteen cup off of the machete, did his business in the canteen cup, and then hung it back up on the machete. And we thought that was pretty hilarious. We laughed about that for
And you
quite
could tell
some
that there were monkey droppings?
Well, what else would they be? They were about the size of your little finger, and there were
Okay.
3 of them in the bottom.
Okay.
So if anybody has any comments they would like to make on either one of these stories, or share a funny thing that happened with you in Vietnam, we would love to hear from you. So we're waiting on that call. In the meantime, we served at 2 different times. Now, I believe when you were there in 68 and 69, the populace was probably more behind what we were doing, that we were doing a good thing, fighting the communists to eliminate the domino theory and so forth. I was there in 71, 72, and morale was probably at its lowest ebb at that point, or pretty close to it. How did you find the morale of the guys that you worked with while you were there?
When I was there in 68 and 69, my unit, the 135th Assault Helicopter Company, came over as a unit in 1967. They formed up in Fort Hood, Texas, and came over as a unit on ships. And I was one of the first replacements in 68. The morale was very high. We were not totally aware of all the protesting that was going on in 68 and 69 in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And 68 in Vietnam happened to be the peak of the war. When I got off the plane, there was 525,000 Americans on the ground in Vietnam in the beginning of 1968. And there was more KIAs during, I guess, April of 1968 was the biggest number of Americans killed and wounded of the whole 10 years we were there. So even with that, the morale in my unit and the morale that I was able to see was pretty high. It was pretty decent. I found out we've had a couple of reunions with my unit, since then, recently, and a couple of the company commanders said that the morale really deteriorated as the war drug on. The
Right.
protesters got more protesting. The draftees were more anti-war. So it got a lot worse. But from my experiences in that part of the time, things were very decent. And the last thing that we wanted to be around us was somebody who didn't want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was enough trouble being around aircraft with all the things that can go wrong with a helicopter, the maintenance, the weather, the ammunition, the fuel. Forget about the enemy. There's enough things that can go wrong around mechanical equipment that can really hurt you or kill you. Then you throw in an enemy that's trying to kill you also, and the weather is trying to kill you. As you remember, 6 months of rain and then
Oh,
6 months of no rain.
Mm-hmm.
You had to get used to that. So the last thing we wanted was a draftee or anybody, any protester that didn't want to be there. We wanted to get rid of them. And you've heard a lot about the drugs. I don't know if you saw any of the drug stuff, but we
yeah,
were
yeah.
dead set against. I was specifically.
Mm-hmm.
If a guy wanted to do drugs and then try to come and fly or do his mission, you can't do that. So I was specifically dead set against it. And I heard one time, my crew chief and gunner are still around and we still get together. I heard one time they had when they were off duty, and weren't flying the next day, but I heard from somebody else that they were smoking pot in their tent, and I got furious. I got them, and I was senior to them. I was 21, and they were 20, and and I was an officer, and they were enlisted. Well, I locked their heel and read them the riot act. I think they had to pee in their pants. They were so scared about what I was going to do to them, because I was just so angry that they were putting my life and everybody else's life. They said they never smoked another weed in the rest of their life.
Oh, well, you did mention something I also want to touch on, and that's all the accidents that could happen with a chopper that we may not be aware of. Basically as a grunt, they would come in and do a great job of what we saw them do, but we didn't have any way to know what other kind of dangers that there were to those who worked around the helicopters. Could you expound on that a little bit?
Well, like in everything else, there are doctors that get 70 on their final exam, and there's doctors that get 98. And which one do you want operating on you?
98.
Sure. Well, we have no way of knowing that. We have no way. Once they get that MD license, they're good to go. Basically, the same thing in flight school. When I started flight school in 1967, there was not enough Army personnel to man the flight schools and the demand in Vietnam. So we were the preliminary flight school. The first 6 months were civilians were teaching us how to fly, and their job was to weed out the guys that weren't going to make it, so that they wouldn't waste any more time or money on them. So the first, the first month of flying, they were as harsh and criminal and sadistic as they possibly could be, to make sure that if you can handle that, then you might be able to make it as a good pilot. So we started out with 138 in our flight school class when I started, and we graduated with 96 a year later. But with all the training, and as you well, whether it's truck driving or dealing with the bayonet, with the spirit to kill,
Right.
flying a helicopter, you can have as much training as you want, but when the actual circumstances comes and you have to put that training into play, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the training. It's your emotions, it's your feelings, it's your background, it's your religion, it's all the things coming to be, whether you are able to perform that function when it's called. And I found that to be so true that some guys that got great scores in flight school, when it came to an emergency situation, when the helicopter froze or something went wrong mechanically, they froze. And they crashed and took other people with them. A helicopter has the rotors and the transmission and the hydraulics and the electronics and the engine, and there's so many things that can go wrong. And flight school basically prepares you for the emergency of all those malfunctions. They go over them and over them and over them and over them until it becomes second nature. And that's great. We do all these practice maneuvers in a safe airport or a safe landing run. When you get into the jungles and it happens and you have to land in a rice paddy or in the trees, that's what separates the men and the boys. And some people, I'm sorry to say, when they got themselves into that situation, couldn't handle it. So there was too many to count pilot error fatalities and accidents.
Were there times when you had malfunctions that you had to deal with in such a manner?
Quite a few. I was shot down a total of 3 times during my tour in Vietnam. Had one engine failure, one hydraulic failure, almost hydraulic failure, that would have crashed us immediately. And then some minor thing. Took numerous hits on the Silver Star mission. My gunner did get shot in the leg that night, but was able to continue the mission, and we took a total of about 14 hits in the cockpit, and then again in non
Lethal.
lethal parts. One time we were landing, we were landed, and we were on hold, waiting for the mission to develop, either extract the troops or bring more troops in. And my crew chief at that time decided he was going to do some of the maintenance on the aircraft then, rather than wait till we got back to our base camp. So he was doing some maintenance on the transmission oil, and we got a call. We had to go right away. The troops were in combat. We had to button up and go out there. And he finished up tightening up whatever he was doing, and I took off, and within 5 or 10 minutes of takeoff, I got a hydraulic magnet warning light. That means that there was metal fragments on the magnet that sent a signal to a light that your transmission was in trouble. And the transmission is what turns the blades, and the blades is what keeps you in the air.
Right.
So a transmission warning light is nothing to mess with. So I immediately had to land. I could not get to a safe place. We had no idea where we were as far as the enemy goes, but we had to get it on the ground. We got it on the ground, and luckily it was a safe area. They came, picked us up, and found out the crew chief had not tightened the nut all the way on the transmission, and the transmission fluid had leaked out. And the mechanic said that you probably had another 60 to 120 seconds before that transmission froze and the blades stopped.
That's a sobering thought.
So that was, we kind of laugh about it now after we kicked the living hell out of him for doing that. But now all is forgotten.
Well, you know, a number of years ago, there was a TV series called Tour of Duty that I liked. It was a good series. It was enjoyable, and it brought back a lot of memories. But one of the things that I could not relate to, it seemed that this group would go out on a mission, and then, you know, they would come back in when it started getting dark, and they'd go party in the Ville or whatever. That was certainly not my case. I mean, we'd go out on a mission. We'd be there, you know, maybe 3 weeks or so. And if we came back to any place, we'd be coming back to the fire base. What was the day like in the life of a helicopter pilot?
Okay, we were always stationed at a base camp, and the base camp was supported with ground troops, and we had to protect the fuel and the armament that we used, our ammunition. So it was, and the maintenance. The helicopters would fly pretty much all day. Our missions would run from 6 to 14 hours in a day, and then we would return, and the maintenance crew would be all night trying to get the right number of helicopters available for the next day, patching bullet holes, fixing engines, doing normal maintenance. So it was a constant thing where we had to be at a base camp. And on some occasions, if weather or whatever would prevent us from going back to our base camp, it was problematic. We definitely tried to survive it, but we always needed to get back there. I was in 6 months in a place called Black Horse, Vietnam, which was the home of the 5th Armored Cav Division. 5th Armored Cav Division. And it was just a dugout, a rubber plantation, and we slept in 6-man tents. Here I was, an officer and a pilot, and the best you could have was offer, and they put me in a tent with 5 other guys with 1 light bulb when the generator worked, and no light bulbs if the generator didn't work. So we had an officers club, which was a bigger tent with a bar in it, and we had 3-2 beer. One of our unit was unique, is that 1/3 of my unit was Australian Navy, and 2/3 Army. So one thing that the Australians got every month, whether they need it or not, they got 2 pallets of beer, Victoria Bitters and the other popular Australian beer, I forget. But so we always had plenty of beer, and at the Officers Club is where all the war stories of the day and the previous day got embellished and got to the point where they were read about or nightmared about. So that was and we had a big screen. Outdoor theater that occasionally we would have a movie, again if the generator was working, the projector would work. And we saw movies, the first run of Gone with the Wind and other highlights that nobody really cared about. And we had that screen until one day a rocket got it, or an incoming rocket got it and tore our screen up, so we had no more movies. But it was we never got a chance to go to the village. Never got a chance to go too much outside our compound because it was just too far away.
Okay. Did you wind up having to spend time in the jungle very often, or not?
Only by accident.
Uh-huh.
Only by accident. One of the times I was shot down, we were on a gun run with the enemy to our right, not knowing that he was to our left also, and got me in the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to actually crash land about 300 to 400 yards from where we were firing into. And when we were with a whole company like that, everybody knew that I was going to make my radio call, and we went down. There was no injuries on the forced crash landing, which was a good landing. The landing that people walk away from is a good landing.
Yeah.
So we had a sprained wrist and a sprained knee in the crash, but it was we gathered all our ammunition, our radios, and ran to the nearest tree line, and waited for recovery. And the first ship that came down to pick us up got hit by an RPG and burnt up basically right in front of us. And we had to stay on the ground that whole night before they could get enough ground troops around to secure us. And the first light, they were able to secure the area and pick us up. So that night we were in the jungle, which was not the most favorable. We almost ran out of ammunition, and that was not a good memory.
Yeah.
Not a good memory. How many times did you spend out in the jungle overnight?
Well, about 3 months total, and our missions. The shortest mission I was on was 1 day, and the longest one was 17 days. And then we would come back to the fire base, and we would basically guard the perimeter in between missions. It was a little bit of a break. I wanted to ask you, back at your base, did y'all eat sea rations and lerps, or did you have actual cooked food?
Lerps weren't even thought of back then.
Oh.
It was just sea rations.
Uh-huh.
And we had 2 varieties, cold and hot. We had always cold for breakfast on our way, and then cold for lunch when we took them.
Uh-huh.
And if you were late to the mess hall on the way to flight line, you got the bottom of the case, the lima beans and
Oh, yeah.
some of the other
Ham and lima beans, I believe it
horrible
was.
that were actually horrible. And once in a while, we would get people food
Uh-huh.
that the cooks, or so-called cooks, would heat up in the mess hall. Again, the mess hall was a bigger tent with tables in it and chairs.
Yeah.
But no, we survived on. I can't say that the food was a highlight of my Vietnam tour.
Okay. Now, you flew a Huey.
Correct.
When I was there, obviously the Huey was a huge part of the first CAV, Air Mobile. but there were also Cobra gunships. Now, I think you probably have a preference of one over the other. Could you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
The Cobras were actually just starting to get there, late '67, '68, and they carried more armament than the Huey C model gunship. And I transitioned into a Cobra and flew some Cobra missions. But the benefit to me of having the crew chief and the gunner sitting behind me, each with M60 machine guns with full range of front, side, and back, were much more important to me. They were much more useful. The extra four eyes looking for things and having them there made me want to stay in the Huey and forego the Cobra.
Mm-hmm. Now, when my unit flew into Firebase Pace on the Cambodian border, and this was a siege that took place over a 27-day period, one of our Cobra gunships was shot down. In fact, Eddie Rickenbacker III, I think it was the pilot of that Cobra.
Mhm.
And the old unit that I was with, by this time I was chief radio operator of the battalion, but the battalion I was with just a few days before in the bush was actually the unit that went out and rescued Eddie Rickenbacker and his co-pilot. Fortunately, they survived all that, but that was kind of interesting. That was a situation that brings up another subject. We've got a couple of books here. This is one of the things that if you stretch it, we have a common
Do this one first.
thing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, looking. Yeah. Now, this is a book that Dave wrote. He claims it's fiction. I have a feeling at least the first chapter has a lot of reality in it. The rest of it, I don't know about, but I tell you, I read this book of Dave's in a day, maybe a little bit more than a day, because you couldn't wait to see what other kind of action the main character was going to get into. And
It's a
I
good
highly
read.
yeah, I
Good
highly
read, and
recommend that.
You have to read the disclaimer that says it's a figment of the author's imagination.
Now, this is a book. Let's see. It's Soldiering On in a Dying War. This is the true story of the Firebase Pace and the incidents that occurred there. This happened in actually September 25th through October 22nd. I was there for 11 days and 10 nights, and the Firebase was under siege the entire time. And this was a time when morale was very low. In fact, the author of the book, Bill Shakurty, had found out that I was at the Firebase, and he had contacted me back in 2009 to get whatever input I could give him about what was going on at the Firebase. So we shared about probably 60 emails back and forth as he was asking questions and so forth. I sent him a copy of my CD, which is a memoir that I have written, and he was able to get some additional information from that, as well as 7 of the 28 pictures in this book were pictures that he had gotten from me that I had taken that were related to Firebase Pace. The other thing, speaking of the low morale, in September, I'd come in from Bush, and we had, of course, the Stars and Stripes, which was our major newspaper that we had available to us. And there was a small article that stated that Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird states that we have relinquished all combat roles to the South Vietnamese. Well, I'd just come in from what they used to call a search and destroy mission, and to make things a little more palatable to the American public, they changed that to some other description, but nevertheless, that's what it was. So I fired off a letter to the Secretary of Defense, and to my surprise, about 2 weeks later, I received a response from the operations director of Secretary Laird, and this was a letter that was written personally to me. It was not a border or a boilerplate letter, and that's also included in the book. And the point was that the morale was low. Nobody wanted to be the last one to die, and we knew that we were not in the war to win it in October of 1971. And there were other instances where the soldiers were questioning the authority of the officers and so forth, and whether or not they were trying to just climb the ladder of success on the backs of the soldiers, or through basically suicide missions, or whether they were actually trying to accomplish some sort of a tactical objective. So this also it was a good read for me, because I was part of what was going on there, and I sort of knew the story as I was reading through the book. So anyway, is there anything that you can think of, Dave, that you could draw from your experience in Vietnam that you apply to your daily life today?
Well, you go ahead and answer, but I want you to tell people where they can find the book.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Basically, we want to thank everybody for listening in on this. Again,
Absolutely.
this was a big part of our lives, and I'm very fortunate that came back from Vietnam with 2 arms and 2 legs and reasonable mental capacity. And one of the highlights on that Silver Star mission, not that we did anything special, but very grateful that today there are children and grandchildren running around that might not have been had we not been there on that particular night. So Americans do what they have to do. I really learned a lot about myself and learned a lot about my fellow man during that time. I have no apprehension or distaste for the Vietnamese people. They were doing what they felt was right at the time. We've been back to Vietnam since then and enjoyed it. So I had a decent military experience, and I would encourage anybody who's floundering around and not sure what they want to do, remembering that only 20% or less of the total force ever gets into combat. Mm-hmm. The rest of the 80+% are support people. So if you want a good education and a good training, give it a shot.
Okay. Now tell them about where they can get the book that
The
you
book
wrote.
is available on Amazon in the Kindle version, and Barnes & Noble, and the Nook version. Not every bookstore will carry it, but they can definitely order it for you, or you can get it from Amazon. There's a website, Amazon website, with a 60-second video book trailer that explains what the book is about, and there's quite a few very good reviews on it. And the 2 most common questions I get from people who read it and enjoy it: number 1, how much of it is true? And number 2, when's the sequel coming out? And the sequel will be out this winter.
Awesome. Awesome.
And the name of it again is?
I Was a Pilot for the Mob.
Okay, and this book also is available on Amazon.com. I have no financial interest in it whatsoever, but it is a good read about the sort of the end of the war in 71, or actually, 71. So, Dave, it's been a great pleasure and honor to have you
Thank you, Paul. Thank you
tonight,
very much.
and look
Enjoyed
forward
it.
to
And thank you,
continuing these
Amnon
discussions.
Nissan and Nissan Communications, for doing this.
Yes, guys.
Thank you for all you do, and for everybody that has an interest in history,
and for all those who called in today.
and for all the calling today. Yeah. Thank you.
You're You're attuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisrael Cutler, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.